Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker, and helping you if you're scared. And this is for those of you who worry that the Ukraine war seems to have got stuck and Ukraine is not making obvious progress for the last week or so. And some of you may be worrying, is Russia going to be able to hold on to a lot of ground and it's going to drag on and on? Well, the Kerch bridge is very clearly was shaping operations, and you need to bear in mind that strategy takes patience in warfare. And the news in the Financial Times, it says some Western officials expect Ukraine to liberate Kherson next week. And then we had some very broad hints from Ukraine itself that they plan. So this is one of the this is a Ukrainian official, and in this video, he eats a watermelon towards the end. When the interviewer asks him, is there going to be a Kherson offensive? He says, I can't say because of operational security. And he eats a watermelon. Kherson is famous for its watermelons. So this means that he's saying that we're going to be able to eat the Kherson watermelons in Ukraine now in the near future. I think it's something like that is his message. So they clearly are planning it quite quickly soon, and that's not surprising because that's pretty obvious. I'll come to that in a minute. That is probably what the Kerch bridge attack was preparing for. Now, what's happening here is that there are about 15,000 soldiers trapped on the far side of the Dnieper River. And it's very sad when you take the Russian point of view. These conscripts who've been rushed there, and then they're having to, and they're recently mobilised. Some of them will be recently mobilised. They've got no fuel, they've got little food, they've got not much by way of munitions, and then they've just been left there, and they want to retreat to the side of the Dnieper River, and Putin just says, no, you've got to stay on that side. And he's made this mistake before, multiple times. So with Izium, with Lyman, it's just what he does. If what the Ukrainians gradually encircle a big concentration of Russian troops, and any sensible commander would say, we've got to retreat to somewhere where we can defend. But Putin says, stay there, and just let them trap you. Very, very bizarre, terrible strategy. And in that way, he lost nearly 100 tanks in Izium, because he told his first guards tank army, which is supposed to protect Moscow, to just stay there. And they said, we need to retreat. He said, no, stay there. And so they just stayed there until they are very obedient in the Russian military. They have a very top-down command system where the people at the bottom only do what they're told to do for the people above, with very little independent decision-making. So they just stayed there. And they're terrified to do anything different from what their superiors have told them to do. So the same thing is happening here in Kherson. The Russian soldiers are gathering there, are gathered there, and they want to retreat across because using HIMARS, and the Russians they can't shoot down HIMARS. They just go straight through the Russian air defences, and they never even notice them. And they've cut through the bridges here, and they can just hit anywhere they like within 80 miles of the front line. Very precise, within meters. As soon as they hear of a target, they can hit it. Or their munition dumps of the Russians have been just blowing up whenever they build up a munitions dump, and as soon as the Ukrainians know about it, they drop HIMARS on it and it blows up. And so the Ukrainians are stuck on this side of this river. 15,000 of them with some of the most advanced and best equipment that Russia has, all trapped on that side. Ukrainians took this section in just a couple of days. They're very likely to take another section like that all the way up to the Inhulets River, and then once they do that, and then come down from this side too as well, then the Russian soldiers will be trapped in Kherson, and they'll all be within firing range. They won't be able to cross the river, and they'll just eventually all be captured or killed or surrender. And many of them are already surrendering in that area already. So the Ukrainians are hinting that they expect to actually take Kherson. That means completely liberated next week, which seems very quick. They couldn't do it street by street. That's a big city. It's 300, nearly 300,000 people, 3 times the size of the city of Oxford, size of Utrecht, or I can't find another, the size of Belfast in Northern Ireland. It's quite a big city. And so they're not going to win it street by street by next week, but they are probably just going to, they just maybe expect the Russians to surrender at that point, or I'm not sure what. But anyway, they are certainly they seem all set for a big offensive. Now there've been some counter-offensive, because it's the offensive was the Russians, their counter-offensive because they're liberating. I sometimes come out with the wrong word there. So they're doing a counter-offensive there, and there's certainly some fighting here today, but it mightn't be the counter-offensive proper, because they do what seemed like failed offensive first, which is basically probing attacks, where they're finding out how the Russians respond if they can poke them in a particular way. And they might do 2 or 3 of those before they actually start the proper attack. So so that's what's happening there. And so this is the signs that the Russians begin to worry about what's going to happen. And then so this is what's likely to be the situation towards the end of next week. If they do as they seem likely, that they'll have taken a large area of Russian, there wouldn't be a patch around Kherson, and then they will have fire control using the M777s, which are much lower cost weapons, missiles than the HIMARS, and then the entire region will be within firing range pretty much of the Ukrainians, and then that's at that point it will be kind of really very difficult for the Russians. So and the thing is, we're cutting through the Kerch bridge, then the Russians are very dependent on the railways. The Soviet Union, they inherited from the Soviet Union a system of travelling on railways for wars, but also backed up by huge military air transport, to transport things around by air, and lots of automobiles. The Russians junked the automobiles, junked the big air transports, and all they had left was the railway lines and huge logistic hubs. And this worked fine for things like subduing areas of Russia. But when it comes to a war like in Crimea, like in Ukraine, this doesn't work very well at all. It makes them very vulnerable. They can't use the roads very effectively because they need lots of trucks, and it's very difficult to go more than 100 kilometers supplied by road with their system. And with the railways, they're used to building up huge supply dumps, and of course then the Ukrainians drop HIMARS on them, and so they have to reconfigure and try to use a different way of fighting in the middle of the war, and that's pretty much impossible to do. So that's Russia's predicament, and since HIMARS, their usage of shells has dropped about 7-fold or something, and they were managing to go forward by just having sheer numbers of shells that they would be able to fire at the Ukrainians. And now Ukrainians have far more precise weapons, and the Russians have very little, because their munitions dumps keep blowing up if they build a big munitions dump to supply the front line, and because of the railways. And so the Ukrainians have the railways here, as you can see, they all go close to the front line, and so it's and then in some places I think they actually go beyond the front line and back again, and so they can't really supply by rail from here all the way to there very easily. It's very easy for the Ukrainians to stop them. They have a road transport which goes along the coast, so they can send things that way, but the problem with that is they have much less capacity, and it takes much longer to get things to the front lines. So the they were depending on the Crimea bridge for both Kherson and Melitopol. And those areas are now completely cut off. And the bridge is going likely out of action. The document uploaded to Russia says that it will likely be out of action, that it will take until July 2023 to complete the repairs. So it seems to have been much more damaging. That's to the railway bridge. So the road bridge is, they can repair that rather quicker, but the railway bridge happens to be made of lots and lots of steel. And the steel was heated with large amounts of diesel, a fire of several tankers of diesel, all on fire, and then it was rapidly quenched with cold seawater. And that combination is very bad for steel. So that span of the railway bridge is in a very bad way. And steel and the concrete, neither of them like being heated and then very suddenly quenched with very cold water. So the bridge is in a pretty bad way, and they probably might be out of action with heavy traffic for months. So certainly for a couple of weeks, which is probably what the Ukrainians were aiming for, but it could be for quite a long time. And then that means that for all that time, the Russians, they have some supplies here, and apparently they could build up some supplies via sea. They're just not doing that yet. They seem to be still hoping that they can repair the bridge, but it doesn't look like a good prospect of that at all. They have some supplies here, but they'll use them up, and then that'll be it. And then they have very, very slow supply over small ferries over Kerch and trying to do this and that. And so for the time being, there's very little supply. So then if we go down here and we have a look, then they're preparing for counter-offensive against Donbass. They're preparing for another counter-offensive against Luhansk. They're making quite a lot of progress there. There's a place called Svatove, or however you pronounce it, and this is a logistics centre there. And if I go and look at this here, if I look at the big map, it's somewhere around here, around there somewhere. And it's a logistics hub for the entire front line all the way up to there. So by taking the Svatove, they're gradually approaching it at the moment. They haven't quite yet surrounded, but they're going to surround it just like they did Lyman, just like they did Izium. And once that is done, then the supply lines for that entire area is pretty much collapsed. Then their plan would be to go in like this, and once they do that, they cut off the supply from Belgorod to Donetsk. And then the only way to supply by rail to Donetsk is this way. And this way has a much lower capacity than the line from Belgorod. So this seems to be what, I don't think I mentioned that bit here in the blog post. So this seems to be the Ukraine strategy here, and the Russians, bizarrely, they set up a long 15-kilometer trench along here to stop tanks, somewhere here, 20 kilometers back, and they hope to make another 10 kilometers of it by the end of this year. And that's going to do nothing. The Ukrainians are just going to go round it. So the Russians are doing pretty pointless things there, trying to find ways of stopping this advance. And because the thing is, they've got their soldiers there, and then they've got the other one at the very far end there, and they've got to kind of move things back and forth between the two. Is very hard. So they end up, a lot of their best equipment is here. And then, bizarrely, there's a place called Bakhmut here in Donetsk, not very far, somewhere here I think, not very far from where all the action is happening here, where the Russians prioritize some of their very best fighters. They just batter away and batter away and batter away at this small place of 70,000 people that they've been trying to take for weeks and weeks and weeks. And they do like dozens of attacks a day on that, sending some of their best people. And the Ukrainians are very dug in there with very good defences that they set up since that was actually part of the original 2014 line, I think. And the Russians are just, for some reason, some group, they don't seem to be very coordinated. So they have one group here who have as their motivation they want to take Bakhmut, and they just don't seem to be very interested in the plight of their comrades here when they pushed out of all of Kharkiv Oblast, when they lost Izium, when they lost Lyman, and now Svatove, and these people just keep battering away at Bakhmut, and they don't do anything to help their comrades up there. Very, very, very strange. Very poor strategy, terrible strategy. And so they're still doing that just right now. Every day you hear these news about new, and so Zelensky was talking just now about how the Ukrainians are quite a difficult way in Bakhmut because the Russians continue to batter and batter and batter away at them. And so the Ukrainians, they have to try and stop them from getting Bakhmut, this small place of 70,000. And so it does pin the Ukrainians to a bit, but it does absolutely nothing to stop the other Ukrainians advancing here, and the 750,000 Ukrainians. And so they have plenty enough to do 3 counteroffensives and still hold the Russians back at Bakhmut, where they're for some reason focusing on it. No particular strategic significance, not an important logistics hub. Just no reason for them to be so focused on Bakhmut. It's just that whatever local division, and they just took that as their target, and that's what they want. And so they're heading for it. They just try over and over again for weeks and weeks and weeks. So and they don't do shaping operations. They don't really have any strategy, the Russians. They just batter away at some place. So they say, oh, it's going to be Kherson counteroffensive. So they send as many people there, and they just batter away with their artillery there, and they don't really protect their supply lines very well. Well, they did try to protect the Kerch bridge, but with that gone, so then the supply line to there, and then this is Melitopol, and Melitopol is a place where there's a very active resistance. So the Ukrainians, before the invasion, they trained in techniques of resistance, and they're just like the Finnish do. And so there are quite a few resistant pockets around, and one of the biggest is in Melitopol. And so there's a big active resistance. The Russians don't really have total control over there, and so some people speculate that they might do their third. So what is the people I follow? They speculate that Ukraine's strategy probably is to take much of Luhansk and cut off the Belgorod supply line to Donetsk, and then they could come into Kherson, and they'd probably liberate Kherson. They capture a very large quantity of equipment there, along with 15,000 Russian soldiers, because of Putin's order to keep them there. And then that would leave Russia as whatever's left in the Kherson area, and whatever's left in the Donetsk area, which would still be these top quality elite soldiers battering away at Bakhmut, but with very little by way of supplies anymore from there. There's another supply line from here, but it's not so good. And so then the Ukrainians would then have a chance of coming round the back there and trapping them and do the same sort of thing, circling around them. And so for this to work, then it's very likely there would be a final counteroffensive which hasn't even started yet. And so if I go up here, this is one likely place. If you look at this is called the Molochna River and the Molochna Lake, which is a salt sea lake, which is at the mouth of the Molochna River, which the Molochna River comes down here somewhere, and comes through Melitopol. I should get my glasses on to see it properly. It's in there somewhere, and so the Molochna River is quite a wide river, a bit like the Dnipro. It's the other main big river in this area. So it's possible that in some way the Ukrainians would take advantage of that to connect through to this lake. And this lake is a very big natural barrier, and so that is really saving them quite a lot. So that's one possible place. But then there are lots of places they could go, apparently. So just some people talk about that. There's places here. There's Melitopol. There's Mariupol, of course, they want back, but that's quite a big city, although it's only got 100,000 people left living in it, and it would have a pretty high resistance. I mean, whether they would try to do anything, but again, it would be circling it. They wouldn't be frontally taking it. And it's the same with Melitopol. They wouldn't kind of, they would circle around Melitopol if they come that way. But the Kerch Bridge cut here is a shaping operation for Kherson and for Melitopol, because both of those are supplied this way. They can't supply, it's very little by way of supplies gets to Melitopol that way. So that is why some speculation, maybe it's not just for Kherson, maybe the Kerch Bridge cut was also having Melitopol in mind for a later stage. So if that happens, now if that does happen, then the experts have followed say, well, then that's pretty much the end of the Russian invasion. They haven't got much. If they just got a patch here, supplied by Crimea, but the Kerch Bridge cut, another patch here, but it's cut through there, so they can't get from Belgorod. They just got people supplied from there, and these would be two very weak sections. And then you've got the 750,000 Ukrainians around two small patches of Russians at that point. And then the Russians would be in a very, very weak position, and then Crimea would be and then once they take all of that, if they do take all of that, then the Crimea here would then be in an extremely weak position, because they wouldn't be able to be supplied by the Kerch Bridge, whatever the Russians. So I don't believe the truck bomb theory, and I think it's at the ATACMS, because the Saki airport field definitely was a missile. The Ukrainians had admitted that, and if that missile can hit there from there, then why one can hit there from there? It's not really that much difference from there to there or there to there. So whatever missile it was, probably the ATACMS, then why would they use a truck bomb if they got a missile? And how could they synchronize the truck bomb with the oil tankers? Whereas they can't synchronize a missile. And then there's lots of details as to why it looks much more like a missile than a truck bomb. So that's my personal assessment based on the most knowledgeable person that I have found on Twitter on artillery, by far, Thomas Tyner, who used to be the artillery, the person in charge of artillery for the Alpinis, which are mountain infantry in Italy. So he was in charge of artillery for that whole whatever it is, division or whatever it is, and he is obviously very knowledgeable about ATACMS. He knows lots of things, including top secret information that he can't reveal to other people about the ATACMS. And he says that as soon as he saw the explosions in Crimea, in the Saki airport, and then he heard, and he was told that there was no photographs of anything coming in, no video or anything of it. He said, that's ATACMS, because you don't see them coming in, because they're so fast and they travel down vertically. And so, and then the next day he saw they got the satellite images which showed four almost identical circular craters, certainly not four smoking accidents, which is what the Russians claim it is. I said, well, the circular craters straight from above, that's ATACMS, all exactly the same size, all in the same moment, in a minute or so. So he's sure of that. And the other possibility is it's the Thunder 2 or the Grim 2, which the Ukrainians have a factory for making their own missiles somewhere around here, I think. And I'm not sure I've got that quite right. And these. So I had the idea, and I haven't seen anyone else suggest it, which was, what if the Ukrainians sent their rocket engineers along with the Grim 2 ballistic missiles to, say, the UK, and then tested them in a UK missile test site, attaching the ATACMS control units to them. Because, the Thomas Tyner thinks that the ATACMS were given by UK. And then that would explain why the US say they haven't sent any. But the US do say that Ukraine does have missiles that can hit anywhere in Crimea, can hit anywhere in Ukraine, including Crimea. So US have given a pretty broad hint. They actually said that a couple of days before the Kerch bridge cut. They said that that Ukraine already has missiles that can hit Ukraine, and including Crimea, so that the US doesn't have to send them ATACMS. They didn't say what these missiles were, and Thomas Steiner thinks that they are ATACMS, but sent by another country, probably the UK, because the UK has been so supportive under Ben Wallace, our defence minister, and he was very early on. He was one of the ones most supportive and most. He was the one who kind of rallied all the other NATO ones around to send advanced equipment to Ukraine. So, given his, and he was involved before US and before Biden. Ben Wallace was the first, according to Thomas Steiner. Ben Wallace was the first to kind of say, this is what we have to do. So he is a very likely person to have supplied ATACMS to Ukraine. So that's his theory. Anyway, whether or not, certainly by the time they've got all this and then the Crimea in range, then someone might well give them ATACMS if they don't have them yet. If you don't believe that theory that I just described, then they might have it by then. So, so that's that. In principle, the Ukrainians could take Crimea as well, but I mean, it seems to me that it's going to be at some point. It's already been very humiliating for Putin. At some point, he's likely to take the off-ramp. So Biden, when asked, said, "Does Putin have an off-ramp?" And he said yes. And he said that Putin's off-ramp is just to get his troops out of Ukraine, completely out of Ukraine. And he says that Putin could sell that to his people. He says that he would just say that I felt I had to do this, that he felt he had to do this, that he went into Ukraine, that he did these various things, and then he's now completed what he intended to do, and it's now time for the Russians to go home. And the propaganda is so good and so efficient in Russia that a large number of Russians would just believe him at that point. So the Ukrainians, probably their best wish here isn't really to complete everything I described there, because that's a lot of fighting, a lot of Ukrainians killed, a lot of Russians killed too, and the Russians, by the way, they set things up so they can surrender. Have I got a thing about surrendering? Here are the Russians surrendering. I meant to have a thing here about the Russians surrendering. I'm not sure if I have. Oh yes, prearranged capture. So it's actually they can actually go to prison for surrendering, for several years for surrendering. So what the Russians do, there's a hotline that Ukrainians give them, and then the Russians phone up that hotline and say, we want to surrender, but we don't want to do it. It's not be a surrender because we'd go to prison if we do that. And so the Ukrainians say, well, you drive along here on this particular day and we'll capture you. And they drive along with waving a white flag on the point on the gun of their tank. They've got a white flag hanging from it, and they just drive along. In this video, if you watch it, and there's two men. They get out of the tank, and it's all been obviously happened lots of times. The Ukrainians know exactly what they're doing. They just all go and do their thing, and the two people then end up in a prison camp, and the Ukrainians end up with one more tank. And so the big hope for the Ukrainians, I think, is they've been Zelensky has been pushing this all along and saying, Russians, you can surrender, and he's tried appealing even to the generals in his public speeches, saying, you can surrender and come over and become prisoners of war, because what you're doing is not Zelensky's message to the Ukraine, to the Russians, is that this is not going to go down in history as an honourable operation. You're not going to turn out be seen as being the victors in something that was worthwhile and that people celebrate. You're going to be, and that Putin is going to throw you to the wall at the end, and he's going to say that you did all sorts of bad things in order to save his own skin. And so he's saying, he does this sort of thing, so you should come and surrender to us, because that's far better than you coming out after this war as being, these war criminals, or the people who are associated with war criminals, or these people who have just done an ignoble thing in Russian history. So that's his kind of message to them. That Putin does kind of throw people to the wall, or whatever it is, whatever the phrase is. So it's kind of a reasonable message he's giving them. So Zelensky really, he's Russian speaking himself, and he probably is really quite tough for him that he's having to fight against Russians, and so many dying and so on. But that's his what he's put in. He's from Russian. He comes from, this is Zelensky's hometown. It's Russian speaking, not Russian speaking. That city, that one there, quite close to Kherson. And so anyway, if the Putin keeps sticking it out, so we expect them to lose Kherson in the near future. They might, if this kind of leak, deliberate leak of the Ukrainians is true. Then, so it was leaked to the Financial Times, and then that chap I showed you, he ate the watermelon when asked about this leak. So they certainly haven't denied it. So it really does look quite likely they do plan their next big counteroffensive quite soon, and they seem to be quite optimistic of actually taking Kherson. So if that does happen, then that might be the point at which Putin finally decides he's had enough and decides to go for a peace treaty, or just retreats from, say, well, we've done it, and what he would have a very difficult situation because of the annexing. That wasn't very far-sighting, because that means he would have to go to the Russian people and say, we've got to undo annexing of all those oblasts, because it's in 2020 he changed the constitution so that it's no longer permitted to unannex somewhere that you've annexed. It's a one-way process. So when he did all this, it's something he can't undo without changing the Russian constitution. So Ukraine, so that would be quite embarrassing, but it'd probably be better than going through the war more and just losing more and more soldiers killed and all the mobilized people, and all the complaints from his own people about all the dead soldiers and so on, and their husbands and their children and so on dying in Ukraine. So hopefully Putin then would, maybe perhaps Kherson will be enough. Maybe when they cut through there, maybe it would have to go when they cut through there, then it'd be kind of very obvious that they're losing. It might be that it won't happen until they've taken the entire south and there's only the Crimea left. It might be they'll even have to fight back and get the Crimea as well. So we just have to see what happens. Of course, hope that Putin ends this war sooner rather than later. And so that's the big hope. It's just also very, very sad. But and then, so to say, expect this is that long trench I told you about they're trying to build their own imaginary line. It's 10 to 15 kilometers long, trying to reach another 10 kilometers by the end of the year. It seems totally silly, because you could just go drive around it. How's that going to do much except protect, slightly stop, and anyway, we'll see what happens, because the front line it's 20 kilometers from the front line. It probably won't take that long for the front line to reach this point. So, so this, what I told you, the Svatove is a pretty good bet. Kherson is a pretty good bet, but it's always possible that all this thing about the eating the watermelons and everything is just a big bluff in order to try and get the Russians to do something, and then they do something else, because the Ukrainians are master strategists, and it's not impossible that they're just bluffing. But Svatove seems pretty clear that they're going to take that, and Kherson seems pretty clear too, and it seems pretty likely that they are, because it'd be so significant and so important to them if they do have that capability. And I wouldn't put it beyond them that they just bluff there and then they actually go there. I mean, that's possible, because they could bluff and they could be getting lots and lots of Russian soldiers go there, and then they go there, and then that would cut off the supplies from there to Kherson, and then they go to Kherson. It wouldn't put it past the Ukrainians to do something like that. We just have to see what happens. And the way they do the campaign in Kherson, it could be completely different from the people I follow, what they say, because they are exceptionally innovative and in how they fight. And NATO has never had to fight with its weapons, these modern weapons. They never had to fight not against an opponent like Putin and like Russia. So Ukrainians are now the experts in modern NATO weapons, in actually using them. And then their strategy is going to be studied for years and decades to come, partly because it's so innovative and partly because they're the only people who've ever fought a war like this. So, against an opponent like Russia, the same caliber as Russia, which, although here it is, so they took off it by it being the second strongest army in Ukraine, and Russia is certainly much weaker than it was thought to be, but still far, far, far stronger than, say, Syria or Libya or something like that. Wouldn't know where to rank it relative to, say, Israel or Pakistan or something, but or India, but it's certainly still quite a strong army, and and it'd be much less. It'd be nothing compared with Taiwan, because Taiwan is stronger than Ukraine. But then Ukraine has especially talented fighters, so that makes it different from Taiwan, and Taiwan hasn't fought for ages, so maybe you can't compare them like that. But Taiwan has much better weapons, and many more planes and things like that, jet fighters. So, and that is relevant to China, because China will be looking at this and saying, well, this is what happened to Russia, and in Taiwan we've got a much more formidable opponent, at least on paper, from their weapons in Taiwan than Ukraine, and certainly that Ukraine was at the start of the war. Anyway, I've talked about that separately I've got a long article on that. So anyway, I'll upload this, and hopefully this will help some of you who worry about Ukraine being stuck. It's not. It's just shaping, and the Russians are in a very difficult place, and they're sure to lose along these in the not too distant future. And one other thing, but I've talked about it in my long blog post. The Russians are going to run out of shells. They must be getting through it even faster than usual because of all the munitions dumps blowing up, and they're going to run out sometime in 2023 for sure, and maybe this year. And they're out of tanks. They have ludicrous old specimens of tanks that are going on the front line now. I think because a lot of their best tanks have ended up being captured by Ukraine or destroyed, and they have ancient guns and things that belong back in World War II even, and or not changed much since then. And so they've nearly run out of their precision and their precision. If you saw the one calculation is that they have about a week's left if they were to do every day, did the same things that they did on those 2 days when they attacked all over Kiev, all over Ukraine. And Ukraine now has better air defences, so they'll shoot down a lot of them, and Russia would have to fire a lot for a few to get through, because if you do a few, it's much easier to shoot down. And so there's not really likely to be an awful lot more of that going on. And because they only have a week of that, and then they won't know where the air defences are now in Ukraine. And Ukraine suddenly isn't going to tell them where they put the German air defences. So if they were to fire lots of weapons, then lots of missiles, then they might happen to fire lots of them in a place that's very well defended, and they're just all gone. So Ukraine is Russia is running very low on its precision long distance missiles, and that terrorizing of Ukraine it's not going to do an awful lot of that, because it just can't. So anyway, hopefully that helps.